And I'm going to show you real quick. Here's back in the time of the, pardon? Coming out of time? No, you're
Do we
good.
still have the cold ration MREs?
Cold ration?
Everything's freeze dried?
Oh, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, we used
Oh,
to,
they do?
when we went to Norway, I was in the Marine Corps at the time. We actually had what they call cold ration MREs. And the majority of the stuff inside of it was what we call freeze dried, so you have to add water to it. And the reason why they wanted you to add water to it, because when you're in the cold weather, do you think about drinking water? No. But if you got all these clothes on and you're doing stuff, then you start sweating, and then you get dehydrated. Believe it or not, you can get dehydrated in the wintertime.
Well, that was the old, in Vietnam era, they had what were called LRPs, long-range patrol rations, that were mostly dehydrated and freeze-dried, but the problem is in a jungle climate, unlike Norway, is you don't have water readily available. They're lightweight, they're compact, but you gotta have a lot of water to hydrate them. But let's take a look at some of the eating utensils that we had in here, and you guys can come here if you're done eating, and you can take a look at this stuff. And this is hardtack. If for those of you who've never seen it, that's hardtack. That's, don't bang it too much, that's hardtack. And that's about a year old. I made it about a year ago, but it's still edible, but very hard. You can see why they had to break it up. Now, during the Civil War, you basically had, there wasn't any issue mess equipment, so they would buy their own equipment, or, and usually off of what were called sutlers who followed the troops around selling all kinds of different necessary items. And it was usually something like a tin-plated pan, like a pie pan, and you would get your own knife and fork from a civilian source. And this is something from, I don't know about the Civil War, but from about that era. And you notice one thing with the fork is, the fork has only 3 tines. It's one way to tell if it's back from that era, it's only got 3 tines on the fork. Now, in the Spanish-American War, and you saw on the slide up there, this was the type of knife and fork that they issued at that time. But later, by World War I, because they had an older type of mess kit that was the same size and shape pretty much, but there was one problem with the knife. It was too long to fit inside of the mess kit, or what was actually called the meat. The mess kit was actually the meat can, or the meat pan, and the knife, fork, and spoon. At that time, this was called the meat can, because the intent was you would put your salt, pork, or bacon in it to keep everything else from getting greasy. And this is World War I era. In fact, this one was made in 1917. You guys can take a look at that. This is a canteen cup and the canteen from that time. This is actually all World War I era. And you notice in the slide and in the museum, you got a bunch of other cans. Well, they had, and it wasn't used for very long, it was called a bacon tin. This was basically for putting your bacon or salt pork in. This was a condiment can, and you can see on one end it's got like a little lid. That's where you would put salt. Isn't shrink wrap packaging a wonderful thing? And this was for your coffee and your sugar. And you notice it's got these lines here, and if you look in the end of it, okay, it's divided in the middle. Your coffee went in one side, your sugar went in the other, and it was 3 days worth. You just would empty it to one of the lines for each day's ration of your coffee or your sugar. And then here, the last one, that was your, this was for your hardtack. Your hardtack at that time was a lot smaller. In the Civil War era, like that, hardtack was approximately 3 inches by 3 inches. Well, it was smaller then. It was 2 inches by 2 inches. And in World War I, it came in a metal container. And now think about this. With World War I, why do you think you had all of the food that the soldier was carrying with him in metal containers?
That will
No. What was...
insert it.
No. Because it's going to be already wrapped. What kind of weapon did you see used in World War I that you hadn't seen in any other major conflict?
Machine guns.
No.
M1 Grand.
No. Think about what you're going to try to protect the food from.
Chemicals.
Chemicals. Exactly. Gas. It was gas proof. It was gas proof to prevent the poison gases from getting into your food. And that's why after World War I they dropped it when they came out with a lot of international law forbidding the use of chemical weapons in warfare. And in the World War I era mess kit too, you can see the knife, fork, and spoon. And you can see one thing about them, they're tin plated. Okay, they pretty much hadn't developed stainless steel by that stage. And the cheapest way was to make something out of some fairly soft steel. And you tin plated it to keep it from rusting, keep it center. You guys can take a look at this and pass it around. And this is the World War II era mess kit. Some of you are probably familiar with that. And you can see there's a big difference between these utensils and those utensils. In addition to it being made out of what they then call corrosive resistant steel, or stainless steel, what's the big difference?
Stainless steel, stainless.
Besides that,
There's holes in the bottom and
there's holes.
And the fork has
And why do they got holes? Because
Dang it.
it was a very efficient way, this was an efficient way for feeding out in the field. You can take this mess kit, you see now, the older pan, it doesn't have the ridge down the middle. Well, you could take this and you could put it together just like that, and with one hand, you could go through the field line in the field kitchen, and you got a 3-compartment tray. You can put all the food in your tray. And in the other hand, you got your cup for your coffee or whatever beverage it is. And then when you were done, because it's really important for preventing foodborne illnesses to keep your equipment clean. So what do? You've got the hole in there now, and you can take that whole thing, and they would have barrels with, they would have a barrel. First you knock all the food remnants off, and then they had one with hot soapy water and a brush to brush it off. The next one was a rinse can, and the third one was sanitary. So you could very quickly feed soldiers, and they could wash all their utensils very quickly. And the utensils, because beginning with World War I, the knife was a lot shorter, so you could put it all together in a nice, neat little package. But there's only one problem with that.
It's noisy.
Noisy, exactly. So what would we do? In this situation, you take a pair of clean socks and you put them inside the mess kit. Because that way, not only do you keep it from rattling around, you always got a pair of dry socks. And this is the type of canteen cup in World War II. They had several types. This one's got it's put together with stainless steel, and this is 1943. And makes a cool little sound when you unscrew it. And fits inside there. And this is the modern era. This is in the Vietnam era. They came up with plastic canteens, and later in the post-Vietnam era with what they call the butterfly handles on the canteen cup. And so that's about it, guys, unless somebody's got a question about any of this. Hope you learned one or two things. Question?
In World War I, their helmets were like straight. They're like circles, and then they have a curve to get
Yeah.
your head in. Would they take their helmets off, and would they use them as a bows?
Not in World War I. In World War I, the M1917 helmet you're talking about, they call it, some place they call it the Doughboy helmet. The liner for that, like most European helmets, was directly bolted into the helmet. You couldn't take the liner out of the helmet. It has a liner to keep it in place on your head, and a leather sweatband and that. Now the World War II helmet, the M1, was made in 2 separate pieces. You could take the liner out of the helmet, and if you get a chance to see in the supply room, we got some. So it was, and we called it, it was nicknamed, we would call it a steel pot. Because you could, the Army didn't like you doing it, but you could use it as a container for heating up water, either for cleaning up and shaving in the morning, or for dropping your canned sea rations into there to heat them up, you know, boil up some water and put the cans in there. Soldiers are rather ingenious people when it comes to things like that. Okay, any other questions?
In the Civil War, didn't the wives actually accompany their husbands into battle?
Somewhat.
And
They
cook and
they
clean?
they did. They had what they called camp followers in the Revolutionary War and in the Civil War, but they, for the most part, didn't do all of the cooking like that. If they were doing any cooking and things like that, they got paid for it. And so, of course, they're not going to want to pay them to do it, so it's like, you know, Private Smith, you're the cook for today. Well, I don't know how to cook. Well, it's your turn anyways. But after the Army didn't even actually print an Army-wide cookbook until 1878. 1879. And that was 14 years after the end of the Civil War, because the Army looked at the nutrition and how many soldiers got sick during the Civil War and died from disease, and a lot of it was attributable to poor nutrition. So in the late 1800s, they began publishing cookbooks, and then by 1904, they set up a school where they trained cooks, and do a pretty good job of it. Any of you ever eat at Wendy's? You like Wendy's?
Yes.
You know where Dave Thomas was the founder of Wendy's, right?
Yes.
Right? And he passed away a few years ago, but you know where he got his start in cooking? Where he learned how to cook? Not just the Army, right here at Fort Benning, in what was called the Cooks and Bakers School at Fort Benning during the Korean War. He enlisted because he figured he'd have a better chance of not being sent to the war if he enlisted on his own, and he went through cook school and he was stationed in Germany. But this is where he got his start, was here at Fort Benning. Kind of cool, huh? All kinds of history here. All right, well that's it, guys. I'm going to turn you back over to